Welcome back from lunch break. We're going to continue on our busy open session agenda. I have the pleasure of introducing another one of my colleagues around the Institute Director Leadership table, if you will. Dr. Patty Brennan is here. I just want to give you a few introductory remarks before Patty makes a presentation to us. But she's a relatively new director of the National Library of Medicine, and as all of you know, the NLM is the world's largest biomedical library and producer of digital information services used by scientists, health professionals, and members of the public worldwide. She also currently serves as the interim NIH Associate Director for Data Science. By way of background, Dr. Brennan received a Master of Science in Nursing from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD in Industrial Engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, go Badgers. Following 7 years of clinical practice in critical care nursing and psychiatric nursing, she held several academic positions at Marquette University, Case Western Reserve University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She came to NIH directly from a faculty position at University of Wisconsin, where she was a professor in the School of Nursing and the College of Engineering. She also led the Living Environments Laboratory at the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery, which develops new ways for effective visualization of high-dimensional data. Patty is a pioneer in the development of information systems for patients. She developed something called Computer Link, which is an electronic network designed to reduce isolation and improve self-care among home care patients. She directed HeartCare, which is a web-based information and communication service that helps home-dwelling cardiac patients recover faster and with fewer symptoms. And she also directed Project Health Design, an initiative designed to stimulate the next generation of personal health records. She's also conducted external evaluations of health information technology architectures and worked to repurpose engineering methods for healthcare. So you can see from that background, she brings a very unique skill set and along the way has accumulated many honors that I'm not going to detail here. Needless to say, as a co-chair of the search committee for the director of National Library of Medicine, Patty was an obviously very appealing candidate because of both of her background and her expertise, and also, as you will hear in a minute, for her vision of where these hard issues around data science are really heading. And so we were delighted that Francis Collins was successful at recruiting her to come here and to become the new director of the National Library of Medicine. So with that, I'll turn this over to Patty, and she's going to give a presentation entitled Data Science at NIH, Current State, Future Directions.
I'd like to thank Eric for the opportunity to speak to this council, and also to thank you for your time. Organizing, creating the response to the data science challenges and envisioning a data-driven discovery at NIH is going to require a lot of hard work from a lot of different sectors at NIH. And so actually I'm here to give you a homework assignment. One of the things that I have to say that I'm most proud of when Eric was identifying the work we did in home care technologies, it was 30 years ago today that we opened our first home care network, and it was with a 110 baud modem and a WISE 30 terminal, and we were placing it in the homes of people living with AIDS who really had very little health services, and provided them with peer support and some counseling and such. So I'm very excited about having this 30th year anniversary. It's very hard to believe it's been 30 years. But today I'm here to talk to you about a future, and the future that I want you to co-create with me. We're interested in data science at NIH for one particular reason, and that is to accelerate discovery. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to try to highlight some opportunities and challenges, and also some directions that I'm bringing, recognizing two important things. First of all, there is no head nurse at NIH, so there's no one person that's going to create the future of data science at NIH. This is a collaborative, interactive process engaged with by a lot of people. The Scientific Data Council, the Scientific Data Policy Council are two large groups. We have many institutes that have already gone into the cloud and have engagements around data science, so we're trying to lead together and leverage for a future. And secondly, I want you to understand that the future changes every 30 hours. The participants in it change, the investments in it change, the resources change. So what I'm going to tell you today is going to be accurate till probably about Tuesday evening, and then we'll on to the next future. I want you to remember a recent past, which is BD2K. Many of you helped to shape this. Of course, Eric's visions really drove this. And BD2K is a long-standing commitment of the NIH to data science. This is but one program, and we are in the process of pivoting towards the future. The NIH's commitment towards data science and data-driven discoveries is unwavering. The original 8-year investment of BD2K will continue in different forms, and I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the different forms and what we anticipate in the future. At the same time, in the advisory committee to the director of NIH regarding the National Library of Medicine, there was a terrible statement made that the NLM should become the epicenter of data science. Now, the Californians in the rooms know that epicenter is not a good place to be. We have replaced this with the term hub. So we're looking towards the future. The NLM plays a very important part in this future. But I want to take you to the past for just a few minutes and think about, where do discoveries originate from? Because this is the reason we care about data science. We care about discoveries. Initially, discovery originated from experience, and we wrote down the observations that clinicians made as they provided poultices or gave warm liquids or cool liquids to a patient in need. In the 17, 18, 1900s, the experimental model took hold, and the scientific revolution that we could understand phenomenon by understanding it in precise and narrow ways really drove a lot of what we even consider today as important in the data science agenda. However, in the late 40s, early 50s, and 60s of the last century, we began to see that computation provided a tool and an assistance for us to begin to develop more extensive, more elaborate, and more comprehensive understandings of the future. And that is where we are today. With the possibility of data-driven discovery, we hold the potential of being able to understand in context phenomenon that's been difficult to understand in isolation, phenomenon that might be important to hold to us the key to discoveries for cure or the key to discovery for health. And so our purpose here today, and the reason why we're having these conversations at all, is to fundamentally accelerate discovery. We're not trying to replace experimental models. We're not going to eliminate survey research or observational studies, but we're going to complement that with data-driven discoveries, because those very experiments are now generating as much as value from the data they generate as the resolution of the hypothesis they began with. Most large-scale experiments now are generating more data that must be preserved, must be protected, and must be made available. And this is where we are attempting to drive the resources in the NIH to ensure that this continues. You may all be familiar with the FAIR principles for data. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a widely internationally accepted model that says for us to really drive systematically a process of data-driven discovery, data must first and foremost be findable. Second, it must be accessible. Third, it must be interoperable. And fourth, it must be reusable. For data to be findable, it has to have good and stable metadata attached to it. It has to have curation and indices. It has to have ways that the data are labeled that are systematic and shareable. I call your attention to accessibility because this presents a challenge right now that NIH is spending a particular amount of its time, making sure that the data are accessed by those who have the right to access them. Authentication and authorization is a significant challenge, and our hope is to create strategies for authentication and authorization that doesn't require you to remember another 100 passwords, that doesn't require you to have yet another identifying process to get into a new data set or to be able to access something in the future. Interoperability refers to the ability of data to be exchanged and integrated with other data elements, not simply requiring a human to think about two data sets and mapping them together in their mind, but actually to have computationally driven strategies to allow that to occur. And finally, reusable. And I hold out the concept of reusable because when we think about the valuing of data sets for the future, we often think about how much they're going to be used by others. And while the volume of use is an important metric, I'm going to ask you to be thinking with me about other metrics, such as the rarity of the data set or the difficulty in recreating it, to make sure that we don't simply look at the volume of users as an indicator of the value of the data. I want to talk to you a little bit about the computational demands that I see facing us in the present and in the future. Computational demands I divide into three areas: analytics, visualization, and management. Now, much of the work that's been done in bioinformatics and in large data set analysis to date has drawn from the traditions of statistics and biostatistics. And this has been useful and this has been helpful. But I submit to you it's not sufficient. It's not enough to be able to simply use techniques that were premised on the idea that we had data that were collected in a systematic way, data that were available through an experimental model that had controls built in the front end, and apply those methods to data that may have come from anywhere, captured and processed in ways that might not be as stable or as secure. So the biostatistics and statistical basis of our computational tools have to be complemented with things that are approaches to analysis that allow for distributed analytics, that is, moving an analytical pathway to where the data exists, resolving the analytical challenge, and then returning the results, never moving the data itself. The focus there being on the integration of analytical results rather than on the integration of data for the analytical results to emerge. Machine learning techniques remain important and will continue to grow in this area, as will related techniques such as natural language processing. And what we can learn from mathematics and optimization, particularly optimization that allows us to detect of the millions of pathways through a process, what is the one most likely to yield results, may allow us to become more efficient in our analytical skills and make good use of our precious resource of our computational scientists and our domain specialists. Visualization tools become important when the data sets themselves are too large to be visualized by a human. When understanding outliers or understanding patterns in the data can be inferred not so much by examining a table, but by actually seeing results generated from that table. So I see great promise for both visual analytics and increasingly depicting the results of our analysis, moving well beyond the tables and graphs that we're used to. The computational management challenges are significant, and they're frankly not nearly as interesting as the analytics and the visualization. But we need to develop new business processes that allow us to determine at time zero the value of preserving a data set to prepare for preservation in perpetuity. We also need to be able to determine processes that allow us to account for the cost of preservation, the cost for curation, and the cost of reuse. Determining now the storage cost is actually becoming somewhat of a simpler problem because storage itself is getting cheaper. But the process of moving data in and out, or moving analytics in and out, or computing on the cloud, that is where our computational, our costs are going to be both difficult to track and critical for the NIH to be able to get a better understanding of. NIH currently spends $500 million a year in data management, $500 million a year in making sure data sets are available. Some of that is spent on the campus, some of that is spent in the country. $500 million may not be enough. But it is beginning to impinge on our ability to provide new research grants and new R01. So we need to attend to data science so we can, in fact, ensure that we're getting the proper yield out of data while we're still preserving funds for new inquiry. We have a challenge around preservation and provenance strategies, particularly provenance of the analytical strategies. We've become rather familiar about the strategies to record the provenance of data. Where did it come from? Under what conditions was it collected? But provenance of management of analytics still remains a bit out of our grasp, as does versioning control, and particularly within this community where enhancement of an original data set actually might yield more efficiencies and greater insights in the future, requires that we be able to keep track of at what point was an enhancement done, and what point was an enrichment done, which data set are you actually working on. As we move into the future, the NLM will be playing a significant role in the way we manage data on the NIH campus and our ability to make data accessible for new discoveries. Some of you are quite familiar with the National Library of Medicine, but I'd like to show you a brief video to introduce you to about 20 of our hundreds of resources and services that we provide to the world so you get a better sense of the platform that I'm working from. this video, you were introduced to our national networks of libraries of medicine. We have 6,500 points of presence around the country: public libraries, academic health science libraries, hospital libraries. You saw our DB Gap, which I'm sure is familiar to many of you in the room, but also our disaster resources, also our library resources, and importantly, our preservation resources, the history of medicine, the little boy in the end of the video listening to the sound of the native healer from his tribe speaking the words of healing. We have a broad mandate for preservation and direction, and this will support us as we go into the future for data science. We actually date our finding back to around 1836 to 38 from an old Army hospital where a surgeon asked to have some money to buy some books. In the late 1800s, we moved to the Army War Library downtown, where the medical library was down on the Smithsonian Mall, where the Hirshhorn is right now. But during that time, we focused a lot on indexing. From 1870 to 1983, the emphasis was on digitizing information. Networks became important, and in the late 90s, you saw the emergence of PubMed, where anyone could, through web access the great literatures of the world. Now we're entering a period of data and data-driven discovery. So I'd like to close by talking to you a little bit about what I think the National Library of Medicine brings to the NIH and brings to data science in the future, and where I believe we're going. An important first step is to be able to determine high-value data sets. Librarians have done this for years when they've built curated collections of books and of articles, but it's different with data because it's not simply the recording of the information, but it is also the development of new tools for information. So our determining of high-value data sets addresses not only the quality of the data set, but also the tools needed to build that data set. We also recognize that preservation must be done with a purpose, and there are many purposes to preserve data. Some data should just be set aside and stored safely. A small community will use it. We will not need to highly curate it. It will need to be able to be placed in a storage accessible and available to a small group. Other data sets, very high-value data sets, will need a lot of human curation and a lot of engagement and cultivation of the communities to use them. So we need to be thinking about not only the value of the data set, but how do we preserve it with a purpose. Now, the National Library of Medicine has a long history of working with standards for the clinical vocabularies, and we see this extending into phenotype expression and then into the curation and metadata for the genomic and the environmental and the biological and the microbial data that we'll be dealing with in the future. In addition to standards, though, we also have a great demand for building tools for discovery and analysis, for the ability of investigators to know where a data set is, how to get that data set, what permissions are necessary, how long they're able to access it, and what they can do with it, requires a different thinking of the merging of the skill set of the investigator, the analytical tools that are available, and the data that are required. This brings us to a need for extensive and new kinds of training. We envision that there's 4 types of training we should be investing in the next 5 or 6 years. First and foremost, we need to build our cadre of data scientists, both our PhD-prepared data scientists as well as the master's level data scientists that can help with execution. We need domain scientists that are data sophisticated, that are able to take advantage of data-driven discovery strategies. We do need clinicians that understand how to interpret the results of data-driven discoveries. And finally, we need data sophisticated librarians who can assist the research process, the enterprise, in developing the resources and the data services around them. None of this will be done alone. We have partnerships around the world that are engaging in both making sure data are fair, helping us to understand how to best use preprints, determining how to best share data. And this work will require both partnerships with other scientific agencies as well as with the commercial community. We will need to rely on public-private partnerships to come up with data storage systems that are accessible, accurate, and stable. But we will also need to have partnerships with scientists, clinicians, and citizens. We are funded by the citizens of the United States. They need to have a way to directly value and acquire information. So we see ourselves quite committed to an open science platform for data science, making it available, targeted for our scientists, but also open to our citizens and our businesses. To take these next few steps, we're involved already with a certain set of activities. We're working with the BD2K findings, the centers that have created some of the best archiving and analytical tools. We're bringing them together in a way that will make them accessible and findable. We're also in support of a series of activities referred to as the Commons Pilots. The Commons Pilots, under the direction of the Common Fund here on campus, will help us to develop and take 3 high-value data sets: the TopMed data set, the GTEx data set, and a subset of the model organism data sets, and move them into a cloud infrastructure and provide incentives for accessing and analyzing them so we can get some experience first and foremost with our high-value data sets. The Commons pilot should also help us to establish a foundation for authentication, authorization, and a sustainable curation strategy that requires less and less human interaction and only human interaction where it's absolutely needed, and more automated curation. We need to document the cost and experience of those trying to both move data into the cloud, which is not simply moving it from one storage device to another, but requires understanding the platform and the infrastructure, as well as the cost of analytics and the real value that comes from this analytics. And finally, of course, we need to be stimulating inquiry. We continue with training. We have on-campus training. We also still have the T32 training programs. Although we did not release a new initiative, a new call for proposals this year, we anticipate in fiscal 18 there will be another call for proposals for data science T32 training. And finally, we are continuing to fund, and we'll be releasing an announcement in the next couple of weeks of a couple of new curation R01s that are going to help us learn new strategies for curation, because as John Lorsch is fond of saying, 40% of what we invest in data right now goes into the curation of the data. The NIH is in the process of building an infrastructure and determining what that infrastructure should look like. We have adopted the idea of the commons as a framework, and that is, one can think of that as a stack from the compute platform up through the sets of interoperable containers, digital IDs, data and tools, and discoverability utilities. We do envision that there will be a commons constructed here on the NIH campus. We do not envision that that will be the only commons to store research data or to be of use to researchers in the future. So our strategies for creating the NIH infrastructure includes creating a structure here and then an integrated structure worldwide. Essentially, this gives you a very high-level view of what a data commons may look like and the procedures needed to move along with it from the technical end, not from the scientific end. If you look to the left, you see several data commons, because we have several already existing on the campus. The data commons that exist in NCI for genomics, the sandbox here in NSGRI. There will be multiple data commons. Remote data host is situated here to have you think about and signal that there will be data that gets added in the future. Maybe it's environmental data, maybe it's exposures, maybe it's microbiome, but it was not originally conceptualized as part of the original commons, but needed later. Research repositories is to depict the activity, the active research resource at the point where the investigations are occurring. At the right-hand side, you see authentication services, registry services, and access control services. These services, common across all data elements, should first tell us what data are in this repository or in these commons or available through the remote host. Then, who are you as an investigator? And finally, do you have the rights to access this data? We believe that the authentication and authorization services should be common across data sets and not unique to every single data set. We'll die if we have to do it that way. We are in the process of trying to establish the right structure. Within the National Library of Medicine, we anticipate that there will be a division of data and open science. Exactly how this is laid out will require better guidance from our strategic planning process that's going on right now. Many of you are aware that we've had a major shift in the data science infrastructure at NIH in the last week with the announcement of David Lippman's plans to leave the National Library of Medicine and go to the private sector. We're very confident that the NCBI operation is strong. They're in the process of doing some functional reorganization, and I'm happy to tell you that Jim Estelle will become the acting director of NCBI as of the 1st of June. So we expect the operations of NCBI to stay fully functional, and yet we are thinking to the future of what might the structure look like. So in closing, I show you a brief video that helps you imagine with me what might discovery look like in a data-driven future. by telling you the most important word in that entire video was imagine. It is the imagination of our scientists, of our methodologists, and of our patients that will help us drive into data-driven discoveries. I do lots of writings. I have 2 blogs. I'm on Twitter, and there's my email. If I can be of assistance, please get in contact with me. Thank you very much for your time, and I think I have some time for questions.
So, questions for Patty? Let me immediately thank you not only for coming, Patty, but also I think it's really important for this council and people watching to appreciate all the different components of NLM. It's something I came to learn. I mean, those of us in the genomics community, we think NCBI, we think about genomic data, we think PubMed, because that's the world we live in. But as you made clear, NCBI, even within NCBI, there's a lot of other components, but NCBI is just one piece of the NLM family, if you will, and there's a lot of other responsibilities the NLM has that you are not responsible for. So, yes.
I have 2 questions that are related. So the first is, how are you thinking about preprints and whether you're going to incorporate those into PubMed and organization of the preprint landscape and so on. Secondly, I think a challenge that we all deal with is how do you find the papers that you need to read, when there's about 1 million new papers a year. Right. And are you working on developing sort of new machine learning techniques for helping people to find papers? Is there activity in that direction? Because I think that's a really important challenge moving forward.
So I'm really happy that the first 2 questions really address the literature, because the literature are both the beginning and the end of our discovery process. So I will tell you first and foremost, NIH is one of the 11 funders who signed on to the Central Preprint Service initiative that's being headed up by ASAP Bio, but really driven by Wellcome Trust. Now, not only did David Lippman resign last week, but Chan Zuckerberg Initiatives announced a new relationship with bioarchives last week. So we have the ground, as I say, every 30 hours, things change all over. And so the funders have drafted a letter. We're waiting for sign-off from all of our institutes. First and foremost, to say we remain committed to preprints as an important part of dissemination for the biomedical sciences. We recognize it's probably most likely for the biological sciences. First, the clinical science people get really wiggy about some of this, early disclosure, possible risk to patients, those types of things. But NIH will not host a preprint server. We believe it's important to have the science be basically shared in the community. We are working with the 11 funders and with ASAP Bio, ASAP Bio to make sure that what we understand about digital object identifiers is clearly and very early applied. NIH will accept preprints as part of the interim products of research now, so you can put them on a BioSketch, you can put them in your RPRRs. But in order to do that, there's certain criteria that must be met, and one of the criteria is that the preprint must exist in a stable server, a repository of high value, and second, it must have a unique DOI. There are secondary aspects that NLM is working with, for example, linking forward and backwards, so from the preprint to the data source and from the preprint to the ultimate paper. That's not completely worked out yet. Your second question, oh, sure.
And so will you be indexing the preprints in a centralized location as PubMed does for the published literature?
At the present time, we don't anticipate indexing it within PubMed. However, we do index the gray literature in a number of different ways, and there is our short-term vision is that we would be considering the preprint service as being the primary discovery point and indexer, and that we would link to that, but we wouldn't duplicate that. Now, that may change in 30 hours or in 3 years, because I do think there's a need to think about what indexing means and how critical indexing is. Indexing and the whole concept of community-driven standards of terminology really are in flux right now, because as new communities connect, so as we now have biochemists and chemical engineers interacting with biologists in ways we never had anticipated, the community structure is becoming a bit more amorphous. So what I'm envisioning is we will, and I hate to say this word with Carol Bolton, but ontologies may be part of our future. We may have new kinds of literature engagement, the same literature being organized in several ways. Which takes us to your second question, what are we going to do about all these papers? We can't push them through people's eyes. And now we thought about maybe setting them to music might be helpful in getting them subliminally into people's lives. That's probably not going to happen. But over 30 years ago, Ed Feigenbaum wondered why the papers don't talk to each other. Why don't we have something in our curation process that helps papers recognize related and unrelated papers? So yes, in fact, we're not only looking at discovery with a fixed set of papers, but we're also looking at how we can attach to the curation process other discovery tools, so as something is curated, it's also linked into a network not simply of terms and concepts, but also of findings and procedures and machines and methodologies.
Well, I guess my question was similar, which is that what struck me, and I forgot when the last government shutdown was, but when PubMed went down briefly, it makes you realize how frequently in any given hospital on any given day PubMed is used by healthcare, students, fellows, residents, attendings, continuously for patient care. And yet the interface has really not changed very much over the course of however many years I've used it. And so I do wonder how much you're weighing the continued improvement of unbelievably heavily used resources,
Right.
versus kind of the development of new discovery and things like that.
Thank you for the question. So we actually have some people who believe that we've changed the interface so much that they want us to stop changing it. So it is a perspective piece, which says to us, one of the things that we are going towards are more adaptive interfaces, more personalization of the interface for the individual. So our power users can use the system differently than the first-year graduate student. The National Library of Medicine recognizes that our resources are, we believe, essential to the health and well-being of the country. And the safety and security of the country. We have gotten some debates about whether or not we should have let the whole thing shut down for 4 days to let people see just how important PubMed is. That would not be good. Because although we get over 4 million human accesses a day to PubMed, we get many times that access by computer systems that are looking for the value set authority, looking for reference, looking for results. So we do have to recognize both human and machine interaction. We've been working with 18F, which is a technical firm that's grown out of some of the Obama administration early work on open science to help us with our interface design. We are also working with different approaches to researching and retrieval. Right now we have basically a phrase or concept-based searching. David and his group have been working with Google on relevance rankings on way to get more information retrieved that's more of use to the individual. And in this case, he sees click-through rates as an important indicator of that. So we are looking at that. Now, will we get rid of the blue banner across the top and all that text? I would really like to see that happen, but not this week. It'll be a little while.
There's a lot. In fact, there's an awful lot happening in the private sector in this space. What's being done to interface not just NLM but NIH with the private sector, more than just boxes and wires, but particularly in analytics? The private sector is very involved. In fact, I'll be controversial. I think they're way ahead of us in analytics. And how do we bring that in to biomedical research and healthcare?
So this question has got the attention of Dr. Collins, who started in probably late summer bringing together a group of outside advisors, many of whom come from industry, to work with us on this. Using mechanisms such as CRADAs, where we are able to work in public-private partnerships on a project-by-project basis to allow for the sharing of intellectual property while we're still able to advance discoveries in an open way. I share your view that the analytics that we use need to be stepped up quite a bit to be able to make efficient use of the data we have. It's not that we can't make use of our data now. It's not that good work isn't being done, but it will not scale, and it will not scale in the moment. So I'm thinking of in-stream analytics. I'm thinking of the need to develop highly distributed models of analytics. So some of our work will be through partnership with private sector, and some of it will be through partnership with DOE and the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation. We had one initiative this year and a joint funding under the BD2K, the QBIB project, which was about quantitative methods for biology. And frankly, what we see from that is the biologists are thrilled, the analysts are thrilled to get the data, but they want to solve this specific data set's problem, and we're really looking for more generalizable answers. So what I see in the future is intramural research and methods and a bigger extramural and partnership investment in methods. Hi,
Patty.
Carol.
Hi. Thank you for coming and giving the presentation. And I wanted to pick up on the training
Yes.
component. So a lot of the areas that you listed there under the analytics and machine learning. So what's your vision for how much NLM will have its own training program versus integrating with training programs of other NIH institutes who also have a very strong interest in training the next generation of people to be data-driven scientists?
So you have to tell Eric, I did not ask you to ask that question, but I'm really glad you asked that question.
She didn't ask me to.
This is a conversation that's going on quite extensively, and one of the discussions around the BD2K program had to do exactly with this, that different disciplines have different data science problems that they want resolved more in a different fashion or in a unique fashion. So what I envision is that we will continue to have a generalist data science methodology-driven training program, and that will be housed at the NLM, the same way we have an informatics training program there. We will continue to see investments across the NIH in data science relative to the challenges, imaging, for example, with NIBIB, or the genome data sets through NHGRI, where the party of participants, and we are kind of a loosely coupled group of folks right now, needs to continue an interaction with is making sure we have bridges to build generalizable solutions from very specific strategies, and also to be able to build specific solutions quickly out of general strategies. I would envision, if this is Patty speaking now, I would envision that what we'll see in 5 years is data science training attached to most of our big T32 programs, where we're teaching domain scientists how to be domain scientists, some of whom will have data science skills. But the NLM will be the place where we have people who are trained as data science investigators, the people who develop the new methods, who create new storage. And this will probably be more likely with partnerships across to the NSF.
So, Patty, let me ask you a hard question that probably is not a simple answer. Because in some ways, when you and I have had conversations, you point out that, you know, NLM's extramural research program is fairly modest in size, and I know it's something you'd like to see grow. And yet you are, and increasingly are, going to have a lot of eyes will go on the NLM to be the hub, if that's the word you want to use, around data science, computational biology, and so forth. And you know, and maybe that's not that different of a feeling we sometimes have here, in terms of, obviously we are looked as the epicenter or the hub for genomics,
Right.
And yet, you know, what this council oversees is a size budget that is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, you know, inadequate amount for genomics across NIH, and that's why there's far more money being spent on genomics if you look across the NIH, especially with the bigger institutes increasingly doing genomics work.
Right.
And that's well established, and lots of that, maybe because it's sort of first was all being done by us, and now we've worked very hard to develop partnerships, and so are quite integrated, not completely, but quite well integrated with a lot of those activities. I think what you're facing now is a little bit different, because there's a lot of stuff being done. In fact, you gave the number $500 million or something like that. I mean, there's so much stuff being done by our institute, but the bigger institutes, huge investments, probably lots of inefficiencies. We know that, and yet here just the time couldn't be more key, that, you know, for NLM to help sort of navigate this, or help us navigate an area that is both everywhere and sometimes not entirely clear who can even be in charge of this. So these are things you and I talk about. We talk about in various concentric circles of groups that we're involved in. But, you know, how are we going to get better coordinated? Because we obviously have data science portfolio, and this council helps us think about those activities that are very central to what we're trying to accomplish. But just so many oars in the water, including big oars at big institutes, and lots of rowing going on. But what's your sort of, having now been here for some number of months, are we heading in a direction where we'll try to have a more effective and efficient way of coordinating these things? Because the greater enterprise needs this, more efficiently organized, but we're not there yet.
So I think there will be somewhat more coordination than I had expected when I first came in. We used to pay homage to NCI and NIAID and say, well, they're going to do their own thing. We're not going to be able to do much with them. But in fact, there has to be a coordination because, first of all, diseases don't know the boundary of institutes. And so we have to find ways to cross over. Secondly, much of where the hot stuff is right now, where the cool stuff is coming out, is in clinical data that comes out of people. And so we have a special responsibility about preserving that data, about making it protected, about making sure that it's accessible. So some of the solutions can't be institution-specific solutions. Now, I don't envision that NLM will ever become the server farm for NIH. But what I do envision that we will be is the best practices resource so that we have a set of agreed upon procedures that need to be identified to follow a particular pathway or to make sure data do become accessible. I'd like to see us get to a point, but I think it's 3 to 5 years away, that getting NIH dollars to preserve a data set will require that the data set meets a certain set of quality indicators. I believe that we will have to work closely with industry around this because data sets should not be replicated, and we need to actually even find out how much replication is going on. My pathway to that is going to be, excuse me, through early partnerships with some of the smaller institutes while continuing to work at our NIH-wide. Frankly, it's quite a strong informal network of people in the different institutes who have the deep knowledge about the data policies, who have the technical skills, and we are sharing both successes and failures right now. And I see a readiness for people to not see another institute go down the pathway that they may have found a great deal of expense and failure in. That's why we're spending a lot of our efforts on pilots, recognizing that we also have to have some ready stores available right now.
The one thing that does impress me of late, there's a good side and a bad side, but it'll lead to a real point I want to make for council to hear, is I think the collective we,
Yep.
you, me, we have no problem convening all the relevant people at NIH to come together. And you went over some of the things around the various pilots for data commons. It just seems that every time there's a situation comes up, we can get everybody literally everybody who has expertise at NIH in the room to talk about it, share best practices, strategize. And so in some ways, the coordination, I think, is good.
Yep.
The downside of it is that part of the reason we can get everybody at NIH with that expertise in the room is because it's not a very deep bench.
It's a little...
And every time a new committee gets set up, it seems that 80%, 90% of the people on the committee are on all the other committees. And
You remember interlocking directorates from civics? That's what we
right.
have
I mean,
here.
so there seems to be the will to do it, but I think our bench depth is not strong enough. So I guess one of the points I'd make is, and I know you'll agree with this, because we feel this way for us, I know what you're planning and some of the things you're going to need, is that, at some point in time, this hiring freeze will be lifted.
Right.
NIH will be back to recruiting. And there are some, bench, I don't know, maybe bench, I'm thinking of baseball analogy, but I mean, there are going to be some major, really important positions in leadership and program direction in data science, bioinformatics, computational biology, at your place,
right.
at our place, at probably multiple other institute places. And I just, maybe it partially relates to the training question, although we need people even who are trained. I just would implore, and maybe it even relates to Eric's comment that, boy, could we ever think about, there must be some companies getting shut down with some great people that would love to come into a government position to help sort of create this new world that Patty describes. But I think the other thing that's going to happen in the next 2 years is we need to bring in some additional people because our group, we're only going one direction. That's people are leaving, like 2 leadership positions leaving. And we need stronger depth in this. And I just can't think of an institute at NIH that doesn't need to recruit in this area.
I believe that we will add 50 positions in data science within the next 18 months at NLM.
At NLM,
Yeah.
just at NLM. And so this is, and I don't
They
think.
will not all be scientists, but there will be a lot of scientists. It's absolutely essential for us to even be able to make sure that what we're doing now stays connected. It has the crosstalk as we go through this. We have a tremendous opportunity to look at how to best organize our intramural research and our service-based resource center, which is going to be, I think, the pathway to helping to solve some of the NIH problems.
So, again, we tend to fixate sometimes with the budget cycles that money's going to be limited. I'm not sure money's going to be limited in this case. I think we're going to be people and leadership limited. It's just something to keep in mind when we go out on some of these recruitments, if we can get our network on our communities to help us identify good people for this. Anything else Anybody else have anything else for Patty? If not,
Thank you
well,
very
thank
much
you
for
and
the
to be
opportunity to
continued.
speak with you.
And it's great
Oh,
to
yes,
have you
we're-
here.
I think these will continue for a while.
Absolutely. Back to you, Rudy.